Hey everyone, we're going to give about 30 seconds for everybody to get moved over to this wonderful session. Let us know in the session chat if you can hear us.
Yes, test check one, check two. Mic check 1 2 1 2.
Well, I can hear Krystle, so let's go ahead and get us started. Everybody, welcome to day 3 of Margreeman. It's been an awesome week so far with everybody and some wonderful sessions happening. My name is Amanda Rhodes. I'm here from Krystle Conte, and I'll be moderating today's session. But before we get started, I pass it over to our wonderful speaker. Couple of important reminders. Yes, these sessions are recorded and will be available on demand after Margreeman is over. We'll send out an email with that information for you guys. And if you, for some reason, don't want to hear Krystle talk about marketing cookies, which is an awesome topic, you can change to join a different track on the bottom left where it says change track. And if you have a question, please post it in the Q&A tab. If we have time for questions at the end, we will be going through as some of them as possible. If we don't have time for Q&A, we will be reaching back out to you to answer your questions later. So without further ado, take it away, Krystle.
Sounds good. Thanks, Amanda. All right, well, TGIF, everyone. Day 3, we all made it. We are here, and thank you for joining me today. I hope you can see my screen here that says everything marketers need to know about web tracking cookies. Again, my name is Krystle Solomon, and I serve as a marketing automation strategist and in a hybrid role as a privacy and compliance champion here at Conte. So with that role, I'm going to talk to you about web tracking cookies today. All right, of course, before we get started, we have to get to this beloved slide about thanking all of our sponsors for sending in their beloved financial support so that we can continue to bring you this great content that we've been giving you over the past 3 to 4 days. All right, so today's agenda, we are going to establish some cookie terminology and talk about the different types of cookies, right? We got to know what we're talking about first before we get into what you need to know. Secondly, we're going to talk about what's the pulse in the industry surrounding cookies. It's a buzzword, right? And that along with UTM's cookie terminology or cookie tracking is certainly a pulse going on in the industry. So we're going to talk about what's changing and why. And lastly, we're going to talk about what does this mean for you and what's next really on the pipe as it relates to the cookie landscape here. All right, so jumping right into establishing cookie terminology and types. So first off, what is a cookie, right? No, it's not a double stuffed Oreo that you see on the bottom right of your screen, but a cookie is going to be a small text file that a website places on your device while you're browsing, right? They're going to be processed and stored by your web browser. In and of themselves, cookies are harmless, but they serve crucial functions for websites that can generally and easily be viewed and deleted. If you were on Bill Fetter's discussion or chat right before this, he showed you exactly where to navigate to find where those cookies are in your web browser, right? When you hit that right click inspect and take a look at that page source code. So what are they used for, right? Cookies are mainly used for 3 purposes: session management, personalization, and tracking. For session management, think of like your logins, shopping carts, anything else a server should remember when you revisit to that website, right? On Amazon, you're thinking about those scented candles and you're going, maybe let me sleep on it a day or two, right? That's going to log a session cookie to your browser. Personalization, let's talk about more of like your user preferences or themes, like your Chrome theme and setting within your browser. And then tracking, right? Recording and analyzing your actual behavior and interaction with a website. So those are the 3 main purposes for cookies. And extending a little bit further, we're going to kind of break each of those down. When we talk about duration, purpose, and source, being really kind of the high level terms of cookies, right? So duration includes a subset of cookies called session and persistent cookies. Purpose cookies have about 3 or 4 to 5 different types of cookies as well. You have marketing, statistics, performance, functional, and strictly necessary cookies. And then lastly, you have those source cookies, right? The real big buzzwords of them all, the first party and the third party cookies here. So I'm going to break those down here shortly. So first off, duration, right? This kind of ties to that session management we talked about, right? This category encompasses all cookies that remain on your hard drive until you erase them, or maybe your browser does, depending on the cookie's expiration date. Sometimes that's 1 month, right? 30 days. Sometimes it's 6 months, or maybe up to a year, right? But let's talk about really all persistent cookies have an expiration date written into their code, and their duration can vary. But according to e-privacy, they should not last any longer than 12 months. Okay, so think about that when we talk about the duration, right? It could be as little as 30 days. It really shouldn't exceed past that 1 year mark as well. So again, those session cookies are going to be deleted when that session ends, and persistent cookies remain longer after the session ends. So even if you close out your browser, it could stay on your device for, like I said, up to 1 year. All right, there we go. Skip the slide. Next up, we got purpose or personalization, right? These cookies will generally be first party in nature, right? First party session cookies. And they've got kind of two types of purpose cookies. You've got those preference and strictly necessary. And the preference cookies are also known as the functional cookies. Remember going to a browser or, a website maybe, and as soon as you see the website, that cookie banner shows up and it asks you if you want to accept or decline or have more options. I always love pressing or clicking on the more options button. First off, to see if a website is compliant and actually providing me with an option to opt out of tracking. But when I look in there, you're always going to notice that there's those functional or strictly necessary cookies that you really want to keep turned on. And sometimes they don't even allow you to untoggle that option because it really impacts the way a website will function. And so that cookie will allow a website to remember choices you've made in the past, maybe like your language or region or what your username and password is. I don't know about you, but even sometimes these password managers don't get it right, as far as what all the passwords and usernames that I've got stored for all of my visits. So having that website maybe remembering it is probably my best bet. And so those types of cookies are going to be, again, essential for your browser experience and maybe even accessing some secure sites of secure areas of the site. So while these cookies are not required to obtain consent, right, in order to opt in, right, do you accept to these cookies to be placed in your browser, right? That's not really a requirement. What they do and why they're necessary should still really be explained to the user on the website, either in the cookie banner or in your privacy policy. Okay, moving on to more purpose cookies, right? We've got those statistics and marketing cookies that extend beyond those previously mentioned cookies, right? Of just how a website performs. These statistics cookies are going to be cookies that collect information about how you use the website, like which pages you visited or which links you've clicked on. Actually, none of this information can be used to identify you, as their sole purpose is to really improve website functionality. Okay, again, going back to just taking in the information to really be able to see from a user standpoint, is our website really functioning well the way we want it to be? So we're going to collect that data by placing a cookie on your browser. Then lastly, the marketing cookies. These cookies track your online activity to help advertisers deliver more relevant advertising or to really limit how many times you can see an ad. Now, because these cookies can share information with other organizations or advertisers, they are and have been almost always of third-party origin. So keep that in mind as we move forward in this discussion. So rounding out here with the types of cookies, we've got source as our final type, right? More personalization and tracking type of cookie. And this is set by websites to really store your user preferences and track your behavior. And generally, these cookies are of either first party or third party in nature, going back to those marketing cookies, right? Tracking that behavior. And again, these are going to be put on your device to store that relevant information, right? So when we think about first party, though, we're thinking about it in a way that is a one-to-one relationship with you and that browser and that device, right? And that's you going on that domain and you opting into that domain and saying, yes, I agree to be cookied and tracked. And that is a one-to-one relationship with myself and that one to that domain, right? I'm on Amazon. I'm only giving Amazon my first party consent that I want Amazon to track me. Now, when we talk about a third party, we're talking about a cookie that's placed on your device, not by the website you're visiting, but by a third party, like an advertiser or maybe an analytic system like Marketing Cloud Account Engagement. So these cookies generally follow you along, right, your browsing experience. So beyond the point of Amazon, you're finished looking for those scented candles on Amazon, and now you're, on some potential maybe Wall Street Journal website, just checking out some financial data. But you're like, why do I keep seeing these scented candles? Those third-party cookies from Amazon kept following you along, right? Think about that as that relationship between the first party, meaning it's just a one-to-one relationship between yourself and the actual domain, and third party, it's going to actually extend beyond that browsing experience. So now let's talk about, what's the buzz in the industry, what's changing and why. So first, before we talk about what is changing, let's talk about, well, why are these things changing? Well, based on what I've just actually described as far as the definition of these types of cookies, you can imagine that cookies can store a wealth of data, really enough to potentially identify users without their consent. Remember, some of those cookies don't really require that opt-in for being tracked, especially those third-party cookies of nature, right? Cookies are the primary tool that advertisers use to track online activity so that they can target users with highly specific ads. Given the amount of data that cookies can contain, they are considered personal data in certain circumstances, and therefore can be subject to a lot of your major privacy laws like GDPR, right? So if you're in that region, or if you work for a company, I'm sure that's EU directed from a territorial standpoint, you know that both EU GDPR and the e-privacy directive both regulate the use of cookies and list cookie identifiers as an example of personal information, okay? So when people complain about the privacy risks presented by cookies, they're generally speaking about third-party persistent and marketing cookies, right? Remember those cookies from our previous slides. These cookies can contain significant amounts of information about someone's online activity, preferences, geolocation, right? That all gets stored in that cookie. So when we think about that, we go, well, who's responsible for all this, right? The chain of responsibility, who can access this cookie information for a third-party cookie, can really get complicated, right? Who's going to raise their hand and say, oh yeah, that was us, right? So this only heightens the potential for their abuse and who gets access to your personal data. So it's likely because of this, the use of third-party cookies has really been in decline since the passage of GDPR several years ago. So because of all this, right, what's changing in the industry? Google Chrome, right, represents 60% of the market share. I'm sure you're looking at me right now on a Chrome browser experience. They've actually begun to limit insecure cross-site tracking, meaning cookies that don't include a same site label, SSL, as first party, but are labeled for third-party use. They actually are requiring you to access that over HTTPS, right? That S gives that extra SSL certificate that says that you are a trusted domain that can be presented for a user, right? As of February 2020, this process began. And really, if you've been following this, they really were setting it out, right? 2 years after that, and then they pushed it another year. And now it's really pushing out another year from 2023. It used to be the end of next year, but it's been extended another year by the end of 2024. Third-party cookies are said, I'm gonna put that in quotes, right, to be made obsolete. That's the new target at this point. After that point, B2B and B2C companies and individual website creators who collect and process website user data will no longer be able to do so via third-party cookies. Gasp. I know, right? I'm just kidding. These entities will need to become cookie compliant under new privacy changes and collect, track, and process user information via first-party cookies. Okay, so what does this mean for you? So if you're a publisher or digital advertiser, any brand really should think about how you're currently tracking online behavior today, right? If you're using marketing automation system like Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, this should be a topic of discussion. Where are we at, right? So in the absence of cookies, Contextual advertising will become the new cookie for many advertisers and folks like yourself, providing relevance to consumers who are increasingly concerned they're being watched and listened to or followed by a cookie based behavioral targeting. So, when we talk about contextual advertising, what is that, right? Think about placing an ad for QuickBooks on a finance blog site, right? I've got an example down here below, right? This is more relevant. I'm looking at a financial blog piece, right? Talking about the Dow. Gosh, you've been following the stock market like I have. We're clutching our pearls and holding on for dear life, right? But an ad for QuickBooks is more relevant than maybe that scented candle, right? That I mentioned earlier being placed on here. And also, maybe if you're looking on a running shoe or running forum, right, you see an advertisement for running shoes, right? That's more relevant. It's more contextual to what you're experiencing. That's really the move and what you should be thinking about moving forward. And not just trying to get in anywhere that you can, right? Throwing those darts out, even if it's not relevant to your brand and your industry. So, contextual targeting is where the cookie conversation is headed. And trend reports have shown a 60% positive sentiment from consumers towards brands when ads that appear are more relevant, right? So this is only going to help you out, right? You're going to get better brand trust and loyalty for being more relevant and sending those advertisements or emails or one-to-one engagement or personalizations for things that are more relevant to your audience anyways. So some additional steps to take to get to this point, right? Set aside some time to audit your current website, right? That would be Salesforce and your marketing automation systems to make sure you're prepared for these changes. And one way to do that is to see if you've got first party tracking turned on. This is the most simplest and easiest thing you could do. Go to your Pardot settings and take a look at your account and see if this has been turned on. You want to also make sure Force HTTPS is also turned on and enabled in your marketing account settings. Okay, and lastly, I would say consider investing in a cross-device platform and give you a 360 view of your customer. I know CDP is a big hotbed topic going on, but there are additional cross-device platforms that will really kind of help you understand the holistic, as they say, view of your customer so that you can be providing more contextual marketing and advertisement to your audience. So you want to also think about this as it relates to regulations, right? Are we compliant from a cookie standpoint as it relates to GDPR and CCPA or CPRA? GDPR, right, is territorial based related to those doing business in the EU, European Union. And you want to make sure you're receiving your users' consent before using any cookies, right? Except those strictly necessary cookies that are not required, as I mentioned earlier. You also want to provide accurate and specific information about the data each cookie tracks and its purpose in plain language, right? None of that legal jargon that anyone can understand, but you want to have it in plain language before consent is received. So placing that on the cookie banner itself to say, hey, this is why and what we're going to do if you opt in. Then you want to document and store consent received from your users in your marketing automation and CRM systems or tech stack, however you want to do that. Allow users to access your service even if they refuse, right, to opt in. I'm guilty. I hit decline on a lot of things, right, because I don't want to be tracked. But you still have to give people the option to just go ahead and browse. You can't penalize people for that, for not wanting to opt in. And you want to make it easy for users to withdraw their consent as it was easy for them to give it. All right, if you do all those things, you are cookie compliant within GDPR. On the California side, right, the biggest thing you can do, although nothing really from a regulation standpoint, again, really speaks to it like GDPR does, it still has some language in there about what you can do, and that is display a do not sell or share my personal information page on each web page where third-party cookies are set. I want to make sure people have the option, if they are California resident, that they can place a data subject request in to say, hey, don't sell my information if I ended up opting in where there are third-party cookies set on this website. All right, so what's next? Rounding it out. Okay, Google is working through their Privacy Sandbox initiative to develop advertising methods that protect users' privacy but enable some form of for focused targeting, right? The big old brother sister Google is watching us still, right? But here's kind of their next step. They're working on this project called Google Topics, which is an API-based solution. It replaces the previously proposed solution of this federated learning of cohorts, or FLoC, as the latest interest-based advertising privacy solution. Essentially, this is the next thing that they're saying is going to replace third-party cookies. It's this Google Topics, which basically will allow advertisers to serve different topics from the same individual through the API, right, in an attempt to protect anonymity. So from what I've kind of read about this, basically people, websites will send data to the source, right, to this Google Topics, or it will aggregate this information. And I'm sure it will be revenue-based, right, where advertisers can then be able to browse different topics based on a set of profiles or genres out there, where they can then serve up advertisement to that particular persona or profile. That's how I gather it to be. But there are other industry-wide efforts going on, such as a nonprofit consortium by AIB. They're trying to develop a less invasive alternative to third-party cookies, maybe similar to what Trade Desk is doing with an open source ad ID framework. And there's also a provider like Tapit and Switchboard, who are also maybe even looking at a cookieless ID space. So some innovative things tinkering around in the space and in technology, in addition to what the main player of Google is doing. So kind of talking about it from a regulation standpoint, while there's not really been any further progress on the e-privacy regulation side, or really on the e-privacy side, which the regulation is a replacement of a directive, right? So a directive really isn't a rule, it's more like a suggestion. So the regulation would kind of submit the EU's information on that point. There's really been not been any progress for that regulation, but other EU digital legislations are gaining ground, such as the DSA, Digital Service Act, which will seek to hold search engines, social media networks, or marketplaces accountable for policing content on their sites. So as you've been hearing this entire Margriman conference, that rules and regulations and privacy space or consent space are still being set, right? So the cookies themselves are continuously evolving, which means maintaining a current cookie policy will be a continuous job, right? That's a good thing for us, right? Keep us in our seats, right? And paid through this inflationary and this uncertain time, right? We want that continuous job. But what we need to do, though, while we're here in our positions as marketers, we want to make sure we're properly informing our users about the cookies that are going to be set on our site, and we receive their consent. That will help mitigate any, again, those complaints or data subject requests. The last thing you want to do is get a note from your attorney general or regulator that you're in violation. All right, so in conclusion, like I said in my chat yesterday, I'm not a lawyer, I play with Nasser Conte. Even with that, this presentation is general and educational in nature, and is just something that you should make sure you're going back to your legal team to really make sure you're understanding the regulations related to your company as it relates to how you can execute cookie compliance. And so we definitely want to make sure you are taking it back, this information as a source of information to your legal team or representative. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attendance. I haven't even looked at the time to see how much time we have left. So I'm going to actually exit out of here and see about a stop share here and get back. How am I doing? Oh, 6
Doing great. We've actually got 6 minutes left. So if you do have any questions for Krystle, please post them in the Q&A tab of our chat, and we'll be able to go through those in particular. But in the meantime, I had one good question for you, Krystle, as well. If somebody watching the session wants to learn more about the differences between cookies or anything else about cookies and the regulations around them for their country, do you have any resources that you would advise they look to first to get more information and kind of brush up on the topic?
Absolutely. There are tons of informational resources out there, Amanda. And yesterday we talked about a deck in if you go to the email compliance session yesterday, there are links to some resources for all the regulations I mentioned. And also, I would say IAPP.org. I'll type that in the chat here. Is the industry leader on privacy. They're an international association, I believe, of privacy professionals. So they have all types of webinars, pre-recorded information, documentation. They actually release a lot of content, cutting edge and news breaking content on everything from cookies to the latest privacy changes. So I would definitely bookmark that link. And I also mentioned this data guidance as well. I think it's a .com. It might be .org. I'm going to put that one on, but check the .com as well to see if that one is the link. I have a bookmark, so I don't remember off the top of my head. That one's powered by OneTrust, and they have all repository of all the regulations in there as well. A great library of resources, and that's another thing that you can kind of browse through some more legal jargon if your legal team is unaware as well. I would have them look at that repository. You can sign up. I think they have free trials and paid versions, or if you want to get into the weeds, you can. But those are the top two. And I would say, I had this question asked yesterday, Amanda, about like a blog that had some conflicting information with GDPR. And I said, those two websites that I recommended are from industry, like stamp professionals. These are like credible sites. Some of these blogs do have conflicting information, so I recommend making sure you actually go to the official GDPR website, the official CCPA website, and you can recognize that because the header banners will have the logo and the URLs will be shortened. So, yep. Thanks, Katie, for dropping that in. OneTrust is pretty awesome. So, those are my recommendations. All right, doing good on time. Yeah.
I like to think that if there's no questions in the Q&A, it means we gave our information so clearly and effectively that there's no questions. But one quick question I figured might be useful to talk about is this is Margreeman, or was formerly Pardreeman. Pardot has recently been changing to first-person cookies. Isn't that correct?
Yes, 100%, which is on that one slide I mentioned about auditing your marketing automation system. Is go ahead and check your Pardot settings and make sure that first party tracking is enabled. And you can still leave on the third party cookies until the official cutover is been deemed. And so that is the first step, becoming cookie compliant, and also just getting your toes in the water. And I would even say your entire feet and your legs and your body in the water, because at some point we've got to just go ahead and take the swim into this new water here. And that is going to be the way that you kind of take the first, I'm not a swimmer, but I think that's the first move that you do right there. But just go ahead and just turn it on that setting. It's real easy. And then when you do that, there's a tracking code generator that generates in your domain management that relates to your website tracking code, right? And so you're going to want to make sure that that's also replaced and updated on your website, so that first party relationship is being established between your marketing automation system and your website. And of course, there's all other, I'm not going to go down the weeds about Google Tag Manager and some other ways to fire and get that kicked off. But that's the simplest and basic way to get going.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Krystle. This has been an amazing session talking about the second best type of cookies. The first type is, of course, chocolate chip, which I'm going to go get here after this is done. We'll go ahead and call the session for today. Thank you guys again for joining us for this wonderful session. And then we also want to, of course, shout out to our sponsors for their support. Without them, our Dreamin' wouldn't happen. And we love having this happen every year and getting a chance to learn about more topics. So do check out, we do have some sponsor booths that you can learn more about all of those sponsors and all the cool things they do related to marketing. And then, of course, we do still have some great sessions left today that are coming up right after this one. Thank you guys again so much. And thank you, Krystle.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.